I'd been working late again. It wasn't unusual for me to get home after dark. The construction business was brutal, and the long hours had become routine. But as I pulled into the driveway that night, something felt off. My wife, Sarah, had texted me earlier saying she'd be out with friends, but her car was parked in the driveway. The front porch light was off, which was strange since she usually left it on for me. I stepped out of my truck, gripping the takeout bag tighter. I was going to surprise her with her favorite sushi, hoping it would ease the tension that had been creeping into our marriage. Lately, she'd seemed distant, more attached to her phone, less interested in talking. I chalked it up to stress, but deep down, I feared it was something worse. Pushing open the door, I was greeted by silence. No TV, no music, just the eerie quiet of a home that no longer felt like mine. I called out, "Sarah?" No answer. That's when I noticed it, a pair of shoes near the couch. They weren't mine. If you like the start, I'll continue with the rest of the parts. The shoes by the couch didn't belong to me, and they weren't Sarah's either. They were a man's, expensive, polished, and unmistakably out of place in our modest home. My heart sank as I stared at them, the takeout bag slipping from my hand and hitting the floor with a soft thud. A cold dread began to crawl up my spine, the kind you feel when you know something's terribly wrong but aren't ready to confront it. I moved toward the stairs, each step heavier than the last. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she had a friend over. Maybe someone was helping with a house project, but none of them explained the sinking feeling in my gut. I reached the top of the stairs, hesitating as I heard muffled voices. A man's low voice, and Sarah's unmistakable laugh, soft and flirtatious. I stood outside the bedroom door, slightly ajar, my pulse thundering in my ears. The voices inside became clearer, Sarah's tone light and playful, a version of her I hadn't heard in months. My body felt paralyzed, but my mind was screaming at me to do something, anything. Confront them. Walk away. Pretend this wasn't happening. Through the narrow crack in the door, I saw them. Sarah, sitting on the edge of our bed, her hair tousled like she'd just gotten up, and him, standing too close, his hand on her back as they laughed about something only they understood. My stomach churned. The man was tall, well-dressed, with dark hair and a clean-shaven face, someone I didn't recognize. He didn't belong here, in my house, next to my wife, but there he was, looking comfortable in a space that felt less and less like my own. As I watched them, I felt like an outsider, like I was peering into someone else's life. I wanted to burst in, to demand answers, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I stood there, frozen, the weight of betrayal crushing me. Sarah hadn't noticed me, too wrapped up in the stranger's presence. I could feel my world crumbling beneath me, but still, I didn't move. I couldn't stand it any longer. I shoved the door open, hard enough to make it hit the wall. The sound startled them both, and Sarah jumped up, her face turning pale as she saw me standing in the doorway. The man took a step back, as if putting distance between us would somehow make this less of a disaster. What the hell is going on? My voice shook, the fury and disbelief crashing over me like a tidal wave. Sarah's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked between me and the stranger, as if searching for some way to explain the inexplicable. The man, clearly uncomfortable, muttered something under his breath and grabbed his jacket from the chair. He didn't even look at me as he brushed past, leaving the room, leaving us in the wreckage of this moment. I watched him leave, my fists clenched at my sides, resisting the urge to drag him back and demand answers. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the room, her eyes wide with fear or maybe shame. But she didn't speak, and the silence between us was louder than any argument we'd ever had. "Who is he?" I finally asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Sarah's lips trembled, but she stayed quiet, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Answer me, damn it!" I shouted, taking a step toward her. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "It's not what you think," she finally whispered, her voice so small, so fragile, like she was the victim in all this. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the room. "Not what I think. Sarah, I just saw you with another man in our bedroom. What am I supposed to think?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but they did nothing to soften the anger boiling inside me. She wiped them away quickly, as if crying would somehow make this better. He's just a friend. We were talking, that's all. Talking? That's what you call it. I swear, it's not what it looks like, she pleaded, her voice breaking. We didn't. Nothing happened. Nothing happened? I repeated, disbelief coloring every word. You expect me to believe that? You think I'm blind? Or just stupid? She took a step toward me, reaching out, but I backed away. I couldn't bear her touch, not after what I'd just seen. It's complicated, she said, her words as hollow as her excuses. Make me understand then, I demanded, my voice barely more than a growl. Explain how a friend ends up in our bedroom with you like that. Her hands twisted in front of her, fumbling for something, anything, that would make this right. He's someone I met a few months ago, she began, her voice shaky. We've just been talking about life, about things I haven't been able to talk to you about. So, you confide in him? I asked, my chest tightening. Instead of talking to your husband? She flinched, guilt written all over her face. It wasn't like that. We drifted apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. So you replaced me, I said, my voice hard as steel. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I never wanted that. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I stared at her, trying to comprehend how we had ended up here. This woman, my wife, the person I had trusted with my heart, had been hiding this from me. And now, everything felt like a lie. I love you, Michael, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I never stopped loving you. Her words hung in the air, but they meant nothing. Love didn't excuse betrayal. Love didn't explain how another man had entered our home, our bed. Got it. Here's the continuation of the story in larger sections, seamlessly flowing as a single narrative. The house felt colder now. Sarah was crying, her hands still clutching at some invisible lifeline, but I couldn't find an ounce of sympathy. I had always imagined that if we ever hit a rough patch, we'd work through it, together. That's what marriage was, right? You stick by each other, even when things are hard. But this felt like a betrayal I wasn't sure we could come back from. I turned away, unable to look at her. My thoughts were spiraling, and I needed to breathe, to think. The image of her with him was burned into my mind. I couldn't shake it, couldn't unsee the way they were together, comfortable, intimate. It was as if I had stumbled into someone else's life, someone else's nightmare. I heard Sarah's footsteps behind me, hesitant, and then her voice again, softer now. I know I messed up, but I need you to understand, she began, but I cut her off. Understand what, Sarah? That you've been sneaking around behind my back with another man? I spun around to face her, anger flashing in my eyes. You want me to understand that? Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I've been feeling so lost, so disconnected from everything. From you. And he was there. He listened. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had heard this excuse 1,000 times in stories about people who cheated. The "I felt alone" speech. But hearing it from her made it feel like an accusation, like somehow this was my fault. So, because I didn't listen enough, you turned to him? I asked, my voice low but shaking with fury. I'm not saying it's your fault, she said quickly, stepping closer, her hands reaching out as if she could somehow fix this with a touch. I just didn't know how to talk to you anymore. We've been drifting apart for months, and I didn't know what to do. I was scared. Scared? I echoed, bitterness creeping into my voice. And your solution to that fear was to invite another man into our lives? Into our bed? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We hadn't been perfect, sure, but we had been solid. At least, that's what I thought. Now, it felt like everything I believed in was crumbling right before me. We never slept together, Sarah blurted out, her words coming fast, desperate. I swear, we didn't. We just talked. And I know it sounds bad, but it wasn't physical. I would never. Stop lying to me. I roared, my voice rising in the quiet house. I saw you with him. You were laughing, touching, sitting together in our bedroom like. I stopped, unable to finish the thought. My hands were trembling, the rage inside me boiling over. Sarah was shaking her head, tears falling faster now. Please, Michael. You have to believe me. I've made mistakes, but I love you. I do. I never wanted to hurt you. Her words washed over me, but they felt empty. They couldn't erase what I had seen, what I now knew. The trust between us was shattered, and no amount of pleading could put those pieces back together. I moved toward the door, needing to get out of there, to escape the suffocating weight of her betrayal. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice hoarse. I need some air. I need to think. Michael, please, Sarah cried, reaching for me, but I pulled away. Don't leave like this. We can fix this. We can talk. Just don't walk out. I turned to look at her one last time, my heart heavy with disappointment and anger. I don't know if there's anything left to fix. With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The cold night air hit my face, but it didn't clear my head. My thoughts were a storm, swirling and dark, the reality of what had just happened pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. I got into my truck and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to make the pain go away, but I didn't. Instead, I started the engine and drove, not knowing where I was going or what I would do next. 4 hours, I drove aimlessly, my mind replaying everything over and over. The man's shoes by the couch, the sound of their voices from the bedroom, Sarah's tear-streaked face as she begged for forgiveness. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. At some point, I ended up at a park we used to go to when we first started dating. It was quiet now, the playground empty, the swings creaking softly in the breeze. I sat on a bench, staring out at nothing, trying to make sense of how my life had come to this. Sarah had been my everything. We'd built a life together, a future. We were supposed to grow old together. But now, all of that felt distant, unreachable. Could I ever trust her again? Could we really come back from this? My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, expecting another message from Sarah. But it wasn't her. It was a message from my brother, asking if I was okay. He must have sensed something was wrong. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, unsure of what to say. I couldn't even begin to explain what had just happened. I didn't respond. Instead, I shoved the phone back in my pocket and leaned back on the bench, closing my eyes. For a moment, I wished I could just disappear, that this whole mess would go away, and I'd wake up tomorrow with everything back to normal. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. Hours passed, and eventually, I found myself driving back home. I wasn't sure why I was going back, but I couldn't stay away forever. This was my life, my house, and I wasn't going to let it fall apart without a fight. But as I pulled into the driveway, I saw that Sarah's car was gone. The house was dark and empty when I walked in, the silence once again greeting me like a cold reminder of everything that had changed. On the kitchen table was a note, her handwriting messy and rushed. I'm staying at my sister's for a while. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you can someday. I'm sorry, Michael. I love you. I crumpled the note in my fist, feeling nothing but exhaustion. I wasn't ready to think about forgiveness. All I could feel was the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me, and the crushing reality that the life I thought I had was gone. Upstairs, the bed was still unmade from earlier, the scene playing in my mind again like a broken record. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, wondering how we had gone from being madly in love to this. Eventually, I lay down on the couch, unable to bring myself to sleep in that bed. The house felt too big, too empty, and the silence was unbearable. But this was my reality now, and I had no idea how to move forward. The night stretched on, and as I lay there in the dark, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff neck and a dull ache in my chest. The couch hadn't been comfortable, but even if I'd slept in the bed, I knew the pain would still be there. It wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something I wasn't sure I'd ever get rid of. I sat up slowly, my eyes scanning the room as if somehow the answers to everything would appear overnight. But nothing had changed. The house still felt empty, the echo of last night's confrontation hanging in the air like a fog I couldn't clear. I stood up, stretching my aching muscles, and for a brief moment, I wondered if Sarah had come home. But as I looked around, I knew she hadn't. There was no sign of her, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Part of me had wanted her to come back, to try again, to fight for what we had. But the other part of me, the part that couldn't stop replaying the scene in our bedroom, was relieved. I didn't know how I would have faced her after everything. The house was too quiet without her, and I wasn't ready to sit in that silence. Grabbing my keys, I decided to head out. I didn't have a plan, but anywhere was better than here, trapped inside my thoughts. The weather was cool as I stepped outside, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. I climbed into my truck, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if it could somehow anchor me, keep me from drifting too far into the storm of emotions swirling inside. As I drove, I found myself heading toward my brother's place. He had always been the one I turned to when life got tough. Even as kids, he had been the steady one, the guy who kept things together when everything else fell apart. Maybe he'd know what to say, what I should do now. When I pulled into his driveway, he was already outside, tinkering with his old car. He glanced up as I approached, wiping his hands on a rag before tossing it aside. "Didn't expect to see you this early," he said, his voice casual but his eyes sharp, like he already knew something was wrong. I forced a smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah, well, it's been a night." He leaned against the car, crossing his arms over his chest. "You want to talk about it?" I shrugged, unsure if I was ready to spill everything, but knowing I couldn't keep it all inside. "It's Sarah," I began, my voice heavy. "I found her with another man last night." For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stood there, processing. Then he let out a low whistle. "Damn, man. I'm sorry." "Yeah," I muttered, staring at the ground. I didn't even know how to react. One minute, everything seemed fine, and the next, everything's gone. He didn't rush me, didn't push me to say more than I was ready to. That was one thing I appreciated about my brother. He knew when to let me talk at my own pace. After a long silence, I finally looked up at him. "What am I supposed to do now?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, man. That's the kind of thing no one's really prepared for." He paused, his expression softening. "But whatever you do, don't make any rash decisions. Take time to think. You're angry right now, and I get it, but you need to clear your head before you do anything." I nodded, knowing he was right. My anger was still fresh, still raw, and I wasn't sure I could trust myself to make the right choice in the heat of it all. "Have you talked to her since?" he asked. "No," I admitted. "She left a note saying she's staying at her sister's for a while. I haven't tried to reach out." He gave a thoughtful nod. "That's probably for the best. Give yourself some space. Let things cool down a bit." We stood there in silence for a few minutes, the morning air crisp and quiet around us. I knew my brother was trying to help, but nothing anyone said could take away the weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't just about Sarah cheating. It was about everything. The trust we'd built, the future we had planned, the love I thought was solid. Now, all of that was crumbling, and I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. "I just don't understand how it got this far," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "How did I not see it coming?" My brother gave me a sympathetic look. "Sometimes, when you're in it, you don't see the signs. You're too close, too focused on trying to make things work. But it's not your fault, Mike. Don't blame yourself for her choices." "I don't know, man," I said, shaking my head. "Maybe if I'd paid more attention." "No," he cut in firmly. "This isn't on you. She made the choice to lie. She made the choice to bring someone else into your marriage. You're not the one who did that." I nodded, but his words didn't offer much comfort. Part of me still felt like I had failed, like I hadn't been enough. But even as I wrestled with that guilt, I knew he was right. Sarah had made her decisions, and now we both had to live with the consequences. After a while, my brother clapped me on the shoulder. "Look, if you need to crash here for a few days, you're more than welcome. But if you're not ready to talk to Sarah, maybe you should stay away from the house for a bit. Give yourself a break." I appreciated the offer, but staying at his place wouldn't change anything. Eventually, I'd have to face what had happened, face Sarah, and figure out what to do next. "Thanks," I said, "but I think I need to handle this on my own for now." He gave me a knowing look but didn't press further. "All right. Just know I'm here if you need me." I left not long after, heading back to the truck. As I drove away, the road ahead felt endless, stretching out into uncertainty. I still had no idea what I was going to do. Every part of me wanted to confront Sarah, to demand more answers, but I wasn't sure I was ready to hear them. Not yet. The hours passed in a blur as I drove aimlessly, thinking about the life we had built together. It felt like I was on the outside now, watching my world fall apart. I replayed moments in my head. Our wedding day, the way she used to smile at me, the quiet nights we spent together after long days. It all seemed so far away, like memories of someone else's life. It wasn't until the sun started to dip below the horizon that I found myself back in front of my own house. I sat there for a long time, staring at it, wondering if it was still my home or just a place full of broken promises. Part of me wanted to go inside, but the thought of the empty rooms, the bed where I had found her with him, made me sick. But it was my house, my life, and no matter how hard this was, I wasn't ready to let it go. Inside, the house was just as quiet as before, but this time, it felt different. It didn't feel like a place I had lost. It felt like a place I still had to fight for. I didn't know what the future held for Sarah and me, but I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet. Not tonight. For now, I would just take it one day at a time. The hurt was still there, the betrayal fresh, but I had survived the worst of it. Tomorrow would be another battle, but tonight, I would just breathe. As I lay down on the couch again, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. Maybe it would be the end of us, or maybe we could find a way to heal. Either way, I had to face it. I couldn't run anymore. Sleep came slowly, but it came, and with it, a small sense of relief. Whatever happened next, I knew I would survive. As the next day dawned, I was pulled from the shallow depths of sleep by a persistent ache that no amount of rest could soothe. My eyes opened to the familiar ceiling of my living room, the couch beneath me a reminder of the chasm that had opened between my wife and me. The reality of it all hit me again. The man in our bedroom, Sarah's tearful apology, the note she left behind. Everything felt like a blur, a surreal nightmare I hadn't yet fully processed. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples as the dull headache of exhaustion throbbed behind my eyes. There was no escaping this now. I could drive around, try to distract myself, but the truth was always waiting for me when I stopped. It gnawed at me constantly, an unrelenting reminder that the life I thought I had was no longer what it seemed. Sarah wasn't here, and the silence of the house felt oppressive. I knew she was at her sister's, probably replaying last night in her mind just as I was. She said she loved me, that nothing physical had happened between them, but how could I believe her? The closeness, the comfort I had seen between them. It was more than enough to shatter the trust we had built over years. Whether or not they had crossed that final line didn't matter. The emotional betrayal was enough. I couldn't sit here any longer. I needed to move, to do something. Grabbing my phone, I checked for messages, half hoping and half dreading that Sarah had reached out again. But there was nothing. No missed calls, no texts, no further explanation. Just a void. I got dressed quickly and headed out the door. The crisp morning air hit me as I stepped onto the porch, offering a brief moment of clarity before the storm of thoughts returned. I wasn't sure where I was going, but as I climbed into my truck, I found myself driving toward the lake, a place where I used to go when I needed to clear my head. It was a quiet spot, not far from town, surrounded by trees that offered a kind of solace I couldn't find anywhere else. The road stretched out ahead of me, winding through fields and woods, the sunlight breaking through the clouds in soft, golden rays. It was beautiful, in a way that felt almost mocking, like the world was still spinning while mine had come to a grinding halt. When I arrived at the lake, the stillness greeted me, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. I parked and walked down to the shore, where the water lapped gently against the rocks. The quiet here was different from the silence of the house. It wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful, a place where I could finally think without the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I sat down on an old bench near the water's edge, staring out at the ripples on the surface. My mind wandered back to the beginning, to when Sarah and I first met. We'd been so young, so full of hope and excitement for the future. I remember the way her eyes lit up when we talked about our dreams, how we'd travel the world, build a life together, maybe even start a family. We had so many plans. Now, all those dreams felt distant, like they belonged to another couple in another lifetime. I didn't know how we had drifted so far apart. Maybe I had been too focused on work, on providing for us, and missed the signs that she was slipping away. Maybe she had been too afraid to tell me how lonely she felt, too scared to admit that she needed more than what I was giving. Or maybe it was something deeper, something neither of us could have prevented. The more I thought about it, the more my anger began to wane, replaced by a heavy sadness. I had been angry last night, furious even, but now, in the light of day, all I felt was empty. What had happened to us? I took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside me. I didn't want to stay angry forever. I didn't want this to be the end of everything. But how could I move forward from here? How could I ever trust her again after what she had done? A rustle behind me pulled me from my thoughts, and I turned to see an old man walking his dog along the path that circled the lake. He gave me a polite nod as he passed, but I barely registered it, too lost in the maze of my own mind. For the first time since last night, I allowed myself to consider the possibility of forgiveness. Could I really forgive her? I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be sleepless nights, lingering doubts, moments of anger that would resurface when I least expected it. But was it possible? Could I ever look at her again without seeing that other man's face in our bedroom? I stood up, suddenly restless, and began to walk along the shore. My footsteps crunched softly on the gravel path, each step giving me a small sense of control over a situation that felt completely out of my hands. I wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet, but I wasn't ready to throw it all away either. After a while, I found myself back at my truck, the lake behind me, the day stretching ahead with no clear direction. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. At some point, I would have to face Sarah again, have the conversation we hadn't finished, but not today. I drove back into town, my mind still churning but a little more settled than before. I stopped at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where nobody asks too many questions, and ordered a coffee. The waitress gave me a tired smile as she set the mug down in front of me, and for a moment, I felt a strange sense of normalcy. As I sat there, sipping the bitter coffee, I thought about what my brother had said. Don't make any rash decisions. He was right, of course. I couldn't let my anger dictate what happened next. If Sarah and I had any chance of working through this, I needed to calm down, to think clearly. But what did working through it even look like? Was that even something I wanted? The questions piled up faster than I could answer them, and I found myself spiraling again, my thoughts darkening. It was easier to be angry, to push her away and blame her for everything. But that wouldn't solve anything. I finished my coffee and left a few dollars on the counter before heading back to the truck. I still had no idea what I was going to do, but for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward, even if it was still too blurry to see. Back at the house, the silence greeted me once more, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. I wandered through the rooms, absent-mindedly straightening things, as if by tidying up the space, I could somehow organize the chaos inside my head. I found myself in the bedroom, standing at the foot of the bed where everything had unraveled the night before. The sheets were still tangled from where I had burst in on them, the evidence of their closeness still stark and painful. I pulled the sheets off the bed, throwing them into the laundry hamper, as if doing so would cleanse the room of what had happened. It didn't, of course. The hurt was still there, raw and festering, but at least the physical reminder was gone. As I stood there, staring at the now bare mattress, my phone buzzed in my pocket. For a moment, I hesitated, my heart pounding at the thought that it might be Sarah. I wasn't sure I was ready to hear from her, wasn't sure I could handle whatever she had to say. But when I pulled the phone out, it wasn't her. It was a message from my mother, asking how I was doing. I hadn't told her about what had happened, hadn't told anyone except my brother, really, but she had a way of sensing when something was wrong. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out how to respond. What could I possibly say? How could I explain the mess that my life had become in just a matter of hours? I ended up typing out a vague response, something about being busy with work and that everything was fine. I wasn't ready to talk about it yet, not with her, not with anyone. The day dragged on, each hour stretching into the next, my thoughts circling the same painful truths. By late afternoon, I was exhausted, emotionally drained from the weight of it all. I collapsed onto the couch, staring up at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel normal again. Eventually, sleep found me, though it was fitful and full of disjointed dreams. Faces blurred together. Sarah, the stranger, myself, everything tangled in a web of confusion and hurt. I woke up several times, my heart racing, the sheets damp with sweat. Every time I opened my eyes, I was reminded of the reality I couldn't escape. The next few days passed in much the same way. I didn't leave the house much, except to go on long drives or short walks around the neighborhood. Sarah didn't come home, and I didn't reach out to her. I wasn't ready. I needed time to figure out what I wanted, what I could live with. The house felt emptier with each passing day. It was as if every breath I took echoed off the walls, bouncing back to remind me that I was alone in a space that used to be filled with life. Sarah and I had always made this house our home, our shared little universe. Now, it was just an empty shell, devoid of the warmth that once made it ours. It was hard to believe that only a few days ago, this place had been where we laughed, where we slept side by side, and where I believed everything was still okay. I tried to fill my days with mundane tasks to keep my mind from slipping back into the same dark spiral. The yard had never been this well kept. Every leaf was raked, every blade of grass trimmed. I cleaned the garage, organized old boxes, and fixed the squeaky hinge on the front door. But nothing took away the hollow feeling that gnawed at me, constantly pulling me back to the night I had found Sarah with him. Every time I finished a task, I found myself back in that moment. Her laugh, his hand on her, the betrayal hanging between us like thick fog. One afternoon, as I was putting away some tools in the garage, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at it, half expecting another message from my brother, checking in on me like he had been doing for days now. But this time, it wasn't him. It was Sarah. "Can we talk?" Just 3 words. Simple. Direct. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. Part of me had been waiting for this, dreading it but knowing it was inevitable. The other part of me, the one that still ached with anger and disbelief, wanted to throw the phone across the room and never speak to her again. I didn't respond immediately. I couldn't. Instead, I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stepped outside, breathing in the cool autumn air. I needed to think. For hours, I walked around town, not really seeing anything, just wandering in an attempt to clear my mind. But no matter how far I walked, the question remained the same. What would I say to her? What did I want from her? Was there even a way to salvage what we had, or was it all just too broken? By the time I made it back home, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. The house stood dark and quiet, waiting for me to make a decision. I sat on the porch steps, staring at the message again, as if the words might offer some new insight if I looked at them long enough. Finally, I typed out a reply, "Yeah. When?" The response came quickly, "Tomorrow. I'll come by." Tomorrow. The thought of seeing her again, of facing the reality of what had happened, twisted my stomach into knots. But it had to happen. We couldn't avoid each other forever. This was our life, and if there was any hope of fixing it, we had to confront it head-on. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. The way she had looked at me when I burst into the room, the guilt, the fear. I wondered if she had felt that way for months, silently carrying the weight of her secret, knowing that it would all come crashing down eventually. And I wondered why she hadn't come to me sooner, why she had chosen to confide in someone else rather than talk to me, her husband. By morning, I was running on fumes, but I didn't care. I spent the early hours pacing the house, waiting for her to show up. The clock ticked slowly, each minute dragging on as if time itself had decided to mock me. Finally, around noon, I heard the soft rumble of her car pulling into the driveway. My heart raced, and for a moment, I thought about hiding, about pretending I wasn't home. But I couldn't. This was it, the moment I had to face everything. The knock on the door was tentative, as if she wasn't sure she should be here. I opened it slowly, and there she was, Sarah. She looked different, tired. Her eyes were puffy, her face pale, and she seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of her actions had drained her of the spark she once had. For a brief second, I remembered the Sarah I had fallen in love with, the woman who had laughed at my jokes, who had held my hand when things got tough. But that memory was quickly pushed aside by the present reality. "Hi," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't reply, just stepped aside to let her in. She hesitated for a moment, then walked past me into the living room. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. She stood near the window, looking out at the backyard, as if gathering the strength to speak. "I'm sorry," she said finally, turning to face me. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it." I stared at her, waiting for more. There had to be more. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she continued, her voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I swear, Michael, I didn't." "Then why?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. "Why did you let it get this far?" She flinched at the question, as if it physically hurt her to answer. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was lonely. I felt like we weren't connecting anymore, like we were living in the same house but in different worlds. And he was there. He listened. And I didn't." The bitterness in my voice was impossible to hide. "You did," she said quickly, stepping closer, her eyes pleading. "But it was different. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't about you, Michael. It was about me. I was lost, and I made a mistake. A horrible, horrible mistake." I turned away, running a hand through my hair, trying to process her words. It was the same thing she had said before, but hearing it again didn't make it any easier to swallow. "And what now?" I asked. "What do you want from me?" She didn't answer right away, and I could feel her struggling to find the right words. "I want us to fix this," she said eventually. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want us to try. I love you, Michael. I never stopped loving you." Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love was enough to fix the broken pieces between us, but I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure if I could forgive her, if I could look at her the same way after everything that had happened. "You don't get to just say you love me and expect everything to go back to the way it was," I said, my voice low but firm. "Love doesn't erase what you did." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "I know that, but I don't want to lose you, Michael. I don't want to throw away everything we've built." I turned to face her, my eyes locking with hers. "Then why did you risk it all for him?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head, as if the answer was too painful to speak. "I don't know," she said softly. "I wish I could tell you, but I don't know. It just happened." "That's not good enough," I snapped, the anger bubbling up again. "You don't just accidentally betray someone. You made a choice." She bit her lip, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. "You're right," she whispered. "I did, and I hate myself for it. I would do anything to take it back, but I can't." I stood there, staring at the woman I had loved for so long, the woman I had trusted with my heart, and I realized that no matter how much she apologized, no matter how much she regretted her actions, the damage had been done. There was no going back to the way things were. The life we had built was shattered, and I didn't know if we could ever piece it together again. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we couldn't say. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath and stepped toward me. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she said quietly, "and I'm not asking for it, but I'm asking for a chance to prove that I'm still the woman you fell in love with, a chance to rebuild what we lost." I closed my eyes, her words washing over me like a wave. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could find a way to move forward, to rebuild what had been broken. But I didn't know if I had it in me. "I don't know, Sarah," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can." She nodded, a sad, resigned expression on her face. I understand, she whispered. I'll give you all the time you need. With that, she turned and walked toward the door. I watched her go, a part of me wanting to call her back, to tell her that we could figure this out, that we could make it work. But I didn't. I let her walk away, leaving me alone in the silence of our broken home. As the door closed behind her, I sank down onto the couch, my head in my hands. The weight of everything pressed down on me, suffocating and heavy. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, or if we could ever rebuild what we had lost. But for now, all I could do was breathe. The house was still, the quiet only broken by the ticking of the clock on the wall. And as the minutes passed, I realized that no matter what happened, I had to decide what I wanted, whether I was willing to fight for this, or if it was time to let go. The next few days passed in a haze, each one blending into the next. Sarah didn't call, and I didn't reach out to her. It was like we were suspended in time, waiting for something, some sign, some clarity about what came next. But the clarity never came. Instead, I was left with my own thoughts, circling endlessly around the same questions. Could I forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? And even if I could, was it enough to save us? I went back to work, throwing myself into the long hours and hard labor, hoping it would numb the pain. It helped, but only for a while. The moment I left the job site, the thoughts returned, gnawing at me until I was exhausted from the weight of them. Every night, I slept on the couch, unable to bring myself to sleep in the bed we had shared. It felt tainted now, a reminder of everything that had been taken from me. And every morning, I woke up with the same hollow ache in my chest. One evening, about a week after Sarah had come by, I got a call from my brother. I answered it, grateful for the distraction. "Hey man," he said, "how are you holding up?" "I'm surviving," I replied, my voice flat. He was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "Look, I know you're going through hell right now, but you've got to talk to someone. You can't keep this bottled up." "I'm talking to you, aren't I?" "Yeah, but I mean really talk," he pressed. "You need to figure out what you want, and you can't do that by isolating yourself." I sighed, leaning back against the couch. "I don't even know where to start." "Start by asking yourself if you still love her," he said simply. That question hit me harder than I expected. Did I still love Sarah? The answer wasn't as clear as I thought it would be. I cared about her, yes. She had been my world for so long. But love? The kind of love we'd had before all of this? I didn't know if it was still there. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's okay," he said softly. "It's okay not to know right now, but you'll figure it out. Just don't make any decisions out of anger. Give yourself time." "Yeah," I muttered, though I wasn't sure if time was what I needed. Time felt like the enemy right now, stretching out in front of me with no clear resolution in sight. After we hung up, I sat there in the dark, my brother's words echoing in my head. Did I still love her? Could I ever forgive her? The days kept stretching on, pulling me deeper into the same unrelenting fog of uncertainty. After that conversation with my brother, the questions refused to leave my mind. Did I still love Sarah? Could I forgive her? These thoughts were like chains, holding me in place, preventing me from moving forward or letting go. The more time passed, the more I realized that I was standing at a crossroads. The longer I stayed in limbo, the more painful it became. But I couldn't bring myself to make any decision, not without understanding what I truly felt, or more accurately, what I was still capable of feeling for her. I was caught somewhere between anger and sadness. One moment, I'd feel a fresh wave of rage rising inside me, thinking about how she had let another man into her life, into our life. And the next, I'd feel an overwhelming sense of loss for what we had. Those years of companionship, those dreams we had built together, everything that felt so sure, everything now broken. A few days after my conversation with my brother, Sarah texted me again. "Hey, can we meet? Just talk. No pressure." No pressure. I laughed bitterly when I read that, as if she could ever imagine what kind of pressure I felt, as if any conversation between us could happen without the weight of everything that had been destroyed pressing down on us both. But despite my reservations, I agreed. I needed to see her again. I needed to look her in the eyes and see if there was anything left between us. Maybe we could salvage something. Or maybe it would be the final nail in the coffin, confirming what I already feared, that there was nothing left to save. We met at a small coffee shop, a place we used to go to when we were dating. It felt strange, sitting across from her in such a familiar place, when everything else between us was now so foreign. She looked tired, her face drawn with the same exhaustion I had seen when she came to the house. But she smiled weakly when she saw me, that same smile I had fallen for so many years ago. "Hi," she said softly, as if afraid to speak too loud, like we were balancing on some delicate, fragile thing that might shatter with the wrong word. I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the sound of clinking coffee mugs and quiet conversation from the other patrons filling the space between us. "I don't know where to start," Sarah admitted, breaking the silence. "Then don't," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Just tell me why we're here. Why do you want to talk?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting around the edge of her coffee cup. "Because I don't want to give up on us," she said finally, her eyes meeting mine with a determination that caught me off guard. "I know I messed up, Michael. I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back, but I still believe in us." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Hearing her say she believed in us should have made me feel something. Hope, maybe, or relief. But instead, it just felt hollow. "You believe in us?" I repeated, unable to hide the bitterness in my tone. "After everything that's happened?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I know it doesn't make sense to you right now, but I do. I know I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I cut in, my voice rising slightly. "A mistake is leaving the oven on or forgetting someone's birthday. What you did wasn't a mistake, Sarah. It was a choice." She flinched, and I immediately regretted the harshness of my words. But I couldn't stop. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface all week was spilling out. "You chose to lie to me. You chose to let someone else into our lives. You chose to betray everything we had." My voice was shaking now, and I could see the hurt in her eyes, but I didn't stop. "And now you sit here and say you still believe in us? What the hell does that even mean?" She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears that were already pooling in her eyes. "It means that I made the worst decision of my life, but I'm not ready to let you go. I'm not ready to throw away everything we've built because of one terrible choice. I still love you, Michael." The word love hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Love. That word felt so foreign to me now, so tainted by everything that had happened. Could love survive something like this? Could it really be enough? I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated and torn. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted, my voice quieter now. "I don't know if I want to." Sarah nodded, biting her lip. "I understand, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'm asking for a chance to show you that I'm still the person you married, that I still want the life we dreamed of." I shook my head, staring down at the table. "The life we dreamed of? That life is gone, Sarah. Everything we had, everything we were building, it's gone." "It doesn't have to be," she said, her voice pleading. "We can rebuild. We can start over." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the desperation in her eyes. She was scared, just like I was. Scared of what came next, scared of losing everything. But could we really start over? Could we rebuild from this? Or was it all just too broken? "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this." We sat in silence for a long time after that, neither of us knowing what else to say. When she finally spoke again, her voice was trembling. Just don't make any decisions yet," she said. "Please, just take some time. Think about it. And if you need space, I'll give you space. But don't give up on us without at least trying." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to make any promises, not when I didn't know what I felt or what I wanted anymore. Sarah left soon after that, and I watched her walk away, her shoulders hunched, her steps slow. For a brief moment, I wanted to run after her, to pull her into my arms and tell her that everything would be okay. But I couldn't. It wouldn't be okay, not yet. Maybe not ever. The following days passed much the same as before. I went through the motions, trying to keep myself busy, trying not to think about the decision looming over me. Every time I thought about what Sarah had said, my heart twisted in knots. I wasn't sure I could forgive her, wasn't sure I could trust her again. But part of me didn't want to lose her either. That contradiction tore at me, pulling me in two different directions. I missed her, missed the way we used to laugh, the way we used to talk about everything. But I couldn't ignore the anger that still simmered beneath the surface, the betrayal that felt like a weight pressing down on me every second of the day. One evening, after another sleepless night spent tossing and turning on the couch, I went for a drive. The roads were quiet, the sun dipping below the horizon in a wash of orange and pink. I drove without direction, just letting the familiar landscape blur past me. The streets, the fields, the quiet small-town life that I'd always known. They all felt distant now, like they belonged to another version of me, one who didn't have to carry this burden. I didn't realize where I was headed until I pulled into the parking lot of the old park on the outskirts of town. The same place I'd gone a few days after everything had blown up, the place where I tried to clear my head. It was nearly empty now, just a few cars scattered here and there. I parked and got out, the cool evening air washing over me as I made my way toward the lake. The bench where I had sat before was still there, weathered and familiar. I sat down, staring out at the water, the ripples on the surface catching the last bits of sunlight. I thought about Sarah, about the life we had built together, and about the future we had planned. Was it really gone? Or was there still something worth saving? The longer I sat there, the more I realized that I was waiting for something, for a sign, for some kind of clarity that would tell me what to do next. But that clarity never came. The answers didn't magically appear, no matter how long I stared at the water. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the old messages Sarah and I had exchanged over the years. So many memories, so many little moments of happiness, of shared joy. It was hard to believe that those same two people were now standing on the edge of something so devastating. As I stared at the screen, my phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was another message from Sarah. I miss you. Just 3 simple words. But they hit me harder than I expected. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to respond, to tell her that I missed her too. But the other part of me, the part that was still angry, still hurt, stayed silent. Eventually, I put the phone away and sat back, watching as the sky darkened and the stars began to appear. The decision was still there, hanging over me, waiting to be made. But for now, all I could do was sit with it, let it settle, and hope that in time, I'd figure out what to do. A few days later, my brother called again, this time urging me to come over for dinner. He knew I had been keeping to myself, and while I appreciated his concern, I wasn't sure I was ready to be around other people. But he was persistent, and eventually, I gave in. When I arrived at his place, he greeted me with a beer and a knowing look, like he could see right through me. "You look like hell," he said, though there was a teasing smile on his face. "Thanks," I muttered, taking the beer and following him inside. We sat on the back porch, the smell of grilled food wafting through the air. His wife, Lauren, joined us soon after, her usual warmth making me feel a little more at ease. "I'm glad you came," she said, handing me a plate. "You've been cooped up in that house too long." I shrugged, not really knowing how to respond. It wasn't like I'd been avoiding people on purpose. I just didn't know how to be around them right now. Everything felt too heavy, too complicated. Over dinner, we talked about everything but Sarah. Work, random gossip, their kids. It was a relief, in a way, to focus on something other than the mess my life had become. For a little while, I could pretend that everything was normal, that I wasn't standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything. But as the evening wore on and the conversation died down, my brother finally brought it up. "How are you doing?" he asked, his voice more serious now. I hesitated, not really knowing how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted. "Some days, I feel like I'm ready to walk away. And other days, I don't know. I just don't know if I can do that." He nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "That's normal. You're going through something huge, man. It's going to take time." Lauren chimed in, her voice soft. You don't have to have all the answers right now, but you do have to figure out what's right for you. What's going to make you happy in the long run? I knew they were right, but it didn't make the decision any easier. Nothing about this was easy. That night at my brother's house, I stayed longer than I'd planned, grateful for the distraction and their company. But as I drove home, the reality of everything started to settle back in. The truth was, no amount of beer, food, or casual conversation was going to take away the weight of what I had to figure out. The house was dark when I pulled up, the quiet swallowing me whole as I stepped inside. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. Another message from Sarah. It had become a pattern in the days since we last spoke. She'd send short, simple texts, always opening a door but never pushing too hard. I love you. The words glowed on the screen, and I felt my chest tighten. How could I reconcile that? How could she say she loved me after what she had done? The confusion, the anger, the hurt, they all came flooding back at once. I dropped my phone on the couch and went into the kitchen, trying to distract myself, trying to focus on something, anything, other than the mess we were in. But my thoughts kept drifting back to her, to us, to the years we spent together, to the future we had imagined. Was it all really gone? Could I ever trust her again? Did I even want to try? I opened the fridge, pulled out a beer, and cracked it open. I took a long swig, but it didn't calm the storm inside me. Nothing could. The truth was, I was stuck. Stuck between the part of me that still loved her and the part of me that couldn't get over the betrayal. As I stood there, staring out the window into the darkness, I remembered something my brother had said the other night. You have to figure out what's going to make you happy in the long run. But I didn't know what that looked like anymore. I didn't know if happiness with Sarah was even possible. The memories of our life together were tainted now, every one of them shadowed by the knowledge that she had let someone else into our world, that she had betrayed the trust we had spent years building. I drained the rest of the beer and sat down on the couch, grabbing my phone again. I stared at her message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to respond. I wanted to tell her that I still loved her too. But the words wouldn't come. I set the phone down, leaned back, and closed my eyes. Maybe sleep would help, I thought. Maybe tomorrow, I'd wake up with some kind of clarity. But as I drifted off, I knew that wasn't going to happen. There were no easy answers, no clear path forward. The next morning, I woke up groggy and unrest, my body stiff from another night on the couch. I glanced at my phone, still sitting on the coffee table, but there were no new messages from Sarah. Maybe she was finally giving me the space I needed, or maybe she was just as lost as I was, waiting for me to make the first move. I got dressed, threw on a jacket, and headed out the door. I didn't have a destination in mind, but I couldn't stay cooped up in the house anymore. I needed to clear my head, to get away from the constant reminders of what had happened. As I drove, I found myself thinking back to that coffee shop conversation, to the way Sarah had looked at me with such desperation, such regret. She had seemed so certain that we could fix things, that we could rebuild. But I wasn't sure if I believed that. I wasn't sure if I wanted to. Before I knew it, I had ended up back at the park again. The same spot where I had gone after everything first came crashing down. I parked the truck and got out, heading toward the bench by the lake. The air was crisp, and the trees were beginning to shed their leaves, a sure sign that fall was settling in. I sat down, staring out at the water, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. It felt like I had been running in circles for weeks, trying to outrun the reality of my situation. But no matter how far I ran, it was always waiting for me when I stopped. As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out of my pocket, expecting another message from Sarah. But it wasn't her. It was from my mom. "How are you doing, honey? Haven't heard from you in a while. Call me when you can." I let out a long breath, guilt creeping in. I hadn't told her about what was going on, hadn't told anyone except my brother. I didn't know how to explain it to her. She loved Sarah, had always thought of her as part of the family. How could I tell her that everything was falling apart? I stared at the message for a long time before typing out a quick reply. "I'm okay. Just been busy. I'll call you later." It wasn't much, but it was all I could manage right now. I couldn't handle explaining everything to her. Not yet. As the day wore on, I found myself back at home, the same questions swirling in my mind. I couldn't keep avoiding the decision forever. Sooner or later, I was going to have to make a choice. Was I willing to try and work through this with Sarah? Or was it time to let go? I spent the next few days in a fog, going through the motions, still unable to make a decision. Sarah didn't push, didn't try to force a conversation. She seemed to understand that I needed time. But time wasn't helping. Time was only making me feel more lost, more uncertain. It wasn't until one evening, when I was sitting in the living room, staring at the photo of Sarah and me from our wedding day, that something shifted inside me. I remembered that day so clearly. The way we had looked at each other, the promises we had made. We had been so sure of each other, so sure that we could weather anything life threw our way. But this wasn't something I had ever imagined. Still, as I looked at that photo, I felt a small flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe we couldn't go back to the way things were, but maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. A different way, but still together. I picked up my phone and stared at her last message for a long time. Then, slowly, I began typing. "I miss you too. Can we talk?" The response came almost immediately. "Of course. Anytime. Just tell me when." I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment I had been avoiding for weeks. The moment I would finally have to confront everything and decide whether or not we could rebuild. I took a deep breath and typed out a reply. "Come over tomorrow. We'll talk." The next day felt like the longest day of my life. I spent most of it pacing around the house, second-guessing myself, wondering if I was making the right choice. I didn't know what I was going to say to her, didn't know if I could actually forgive her. But I had to try. I owed it to myself, to us, to at least try. When she arrived that evening, the sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting as she stood on the porch, waiting for me to open the door. I let her in, and we stood there for a moment, neither of us knowing what to say. The tension was thick, the weight of everything we hadn't said hanging between us. Finally, I broke the silence. "Let's sit," I said, leading her into the living room. We sat down on the couch, and for a long time, we just sat there in silence, both of us searching for the right words. It was Sarah who finally spoke. "I know I've said it before," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm so sorry, Michael. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how much I regret everything that happened." I nodded, my chest tight with emotion. "I believe you," I said quietly, "but believing you doesn't make it easier." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously. "I know." Another silence stretched between us, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know where to start. "I miss you," she said suddenly, her voice breaking. "I miss us. I miss everything about you. And I know I ruined it. I know I broke your trust. But I love you, Michael. I've never stopped loving you." Her words hit me hard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I had heard those words before, but this time, they felt different. They felt real. "I miss you too," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. I don't know if I can get past what happened." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand, and I won't push you. But I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I want to fix this, Michael. I want us to be whole again." I stared at her, my mind racing. Could we be whole again? Could we rebuild what had been broken? "I don't know what the future looks like," I said slowly, the words coming out haltingly. "But I'm willing to try." Her eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of hope in them. "You are?" I nodded. "Yeah, but it's going to take time, Sarah. A lot of time. And it's not going to be easy." "I know," she said quickly, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. "I'll do whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you." For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. Maybe we could rebuild, piece by piece, day by day. But I wasn't naive. I knew it would be hard. I knew there would be moments of doubt, moments of pain. But for the first time, I felt like I could see a future, one where we didn't have to live in the shadow of this betrayal forever. We sat there in silence for a long time, just letting the weight of our words settle. And as the evening light faded outside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.